Well, hey, good morning, Hope City Church. We are so glad that you've joined us this morning. If you would, go ahead and stand up. Maybe send an air high five to your neighbors across the way. Thank you for respecting social distancing. We're just excited to gather together in person and worship the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to jump in. Jesus, thank you just for the opportunity to come, to gather, and to make you famous. Lord, you're the one we desire. Come and have your way. In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen.
in your presence that we are made whole. Come, Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated.
Hi, welcome to Hope City Church. My name is Gerald, and whether you're joining us online or here in person, we're so glad that you've taken the time to worship with us today. If you're joining us online, there is a link in the comments to our connection card, or if you're here in person, you'll notice one in your worship guide. In it, there are a few ways that you can connect with us. If you're a guest with us today, please fill out as much information as you're comfortable giving us so we can connect with you. We all know life is a little bit different right now. And of course, while we're all super excited to be in the same space with other people, would you please respect the 6-foot social distancing guidelines? We want to make sure everyone feels safe and secure as we worship together. If you need to use the restroom, they're located through the double doors on either side of the stage. While we're not currently passing an offering plate, we're still hugely grateful for your generous giving towards the mission of Hope City Church. There are 3 ways to give today. You can write a check and drop it in the offering plate on your way out the door today, or you can text to give right now by pulling out your phone and texting the word GIVE to 267-843-8463 and follow the prompts. Lastly, you can go to our website at hopecitytuscaloosa.com and go to the Giving tab. Once again, we're so glad for your partnership in loving our city in significant ways.
Greetings, everyone. Hi, my name is Ben. I'm one of the elders here at Hope City Church. And whether you're in this room or watching online, we want to give you a big welcome. If you're a guest with us today, we especially welcome you. If you feel comfortable giving us some information here, if you can pull out your connection card out of your worship guide, please fill that out. And at the end of the service, please drop it in the collection bucket at the end of the gathering. Now, one of the things that I love that we do every week is we pray for another local church in our city. We do this for a lot of reasons, but mostly to remind us that we're in this together. So this morning, we're going to be praying for Alberta Baptist Church. Please pray with me right now. Dear Lord, we're just thankful for the neighbor that you've given us in Alberta Baptist, Lord. We get to be together on this strip of highway together, serving you and serving the people around us, Lord. So we thank you for them. We want to seek opportunities to mourn with them and celebrate with them as we continue to grow in our neighborship. And so we thank you. We love you. Please be there and please be here in a big way as we learn more about each other and learn more about you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. How are we? Hey, you're looking good. Hey, my name is John Quitt, and I'm one of the pastors around here, and what a privilege we get to do this together, even in this weird moment of social distancing. So let me pray one more time. We're going to get our hearts centered as we jump in, hopefully, to the meat of our conversation today. So, Lord, we invite your presence, and it is our confession. It's in your presence. It's in the middle of your heart that we're changed. We're transformed. We're moved to people that are people of justice. They're people of extravagant generosity. So we submit our lives to you today. We, not begrudgingly, but we lay our lives down to you, saying, you're better than all things. And of course, we pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. So Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do is right, seek justice, defend the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. It's one of about 2,000 verses in the entirety of the Bible that not only invite us, but if you're a follower of Jesus, it commands us to be people that stand for justice, that stand for what's right, to speak when, frankly, nobody else has the courage to speak, and to speak for those that are marginalized, those that have been minimized, so that we might make, ultimately, Jesus look as good as he really is in the world. I was reminded, certainly in these few weeks, in our story as humans, at least in our nation, this is perhaps the time for our generation or the generation coming behind us or the generation in front of us for the eyes of our heart to be opened, that we might be an Isaiah 117 kind of people that would stand for justice, and people that would stand for what's right, not for what's convenient, not for what's politically palatable, but we'd be the kind of people that would speak for what's true, that we would speak for those that unfortunately don't have a voice. I was reminded again by a friend this week that in the arc of the Christian experience, God doesn't just lay on us all the things that need to change immediately. Thank God for that. Like, thank God for his mercy, his long-suffering towards us. Like, when I became a Christian in high school, he wasn't like, hey, here are the 10,000 things you need to change. Here's 1,000 ways you continually, like, thank God he doesn't do that, right? He's patient with us. So when I first became a Christian in high school, some of you know I grew up in a non-religious Jewish home. One of the first things that God began to deal with me is I opened up the Bible, and by his Spirit began to kind of open my eyes to him, was my language. Like, I cussed like a sailor, and very self-centered, constantly inserting myself and my story into other people's story. And so early on, that was one of the first things that God began to deal with me about. And then a couple years later, in another season, God began to deal with me as it relates to purity and relationships. And then a couple years later, in another season, God began to deal with me about my money and my possessions and mission. And in this season, God's doing something else. And my prayer in the life of our community, and certainly in our city, is that this might be the season for the life of the church, that God would open the eyes of our hearts as it relates to race, as it relates to racism, as it relates to our own dark hearts, that this might be the season in which God does something for us, in us. A couple things that I want to lay before you, and then we're going to get to the meat of this, which is our panel this morning. First is this is just a reminder that there is so much noise happening around our country right now, and most of the noise competing for our attention is driven by the political machine that has somehow weaponized race. And I want to encourage you, if you're not a follower of Jesus, like, welcome, but ultimately I don't have any real authority in your life, and I'm hoping today Jesus is going to look as good as he really is to you. But if you're a follower of Jesus today, let me just lay before you that ultimately our ears first need to be attuned to the person of Jesus, to his word, by his Spirit, not to Fox News, not to CNN, wherever you might land. Like, we want to be a people attuned to his word. And if you're like, well, I don't know what the word says, well, you got a copy of it somewhere. Like, we want to be a people, like, rooted in the Bible. I was online. That was my first mistake. I was on social media this week, and which is just a grand waste of time. I mean, that if you want to know my yeah, it's a grand waste of my time. I would contend social media is probably a grand waste of your time. Different subject for another time. But I was on there this week because of all that's happening around the world, just listening in. And I see this meme, this statement come up all the time right now in these last few weeks, and primarily propagated by white people, that says things like, this is not a race problem, because there's only one race. It's the human race. Only perpetuated by white people, by the way. And so, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, by the way, that's not true, right? Like Genesis 11, God created races. He created ethnicities. And even if you're like, I don't believe that, well, you live in the culture, right? You live in a cultural construct like this, in which our race and our ethnicity, it leads the way, and it goes through the doors before we ever get there. Now, if you're white, like I am, we don't generally see that. But our whiteness, our ethnicity, it's opening doors for us that you don't even know. It's creating opportunities. It's creating special moments simply because you're white. And for black brothers and sisters, their ethnicity, their race, it goes before them. And before they can ever advocate for themselves, before they can ever communicate their skill and their value, their skin color, it often closes doors. And so we want to tune our eyes and our hearts to Jesus. Like, what does Jesus say about people? What does he say about races? What does he say about the oppressed? What does he say about the minimized? He has quite a bit to say. Second is this, is in this conversation, you and I, as followers of Jesus, if you're not a Christian, like, just listen in. But if you're a Christian in this place, and by Christian, I don't mean you follow a set of rules. I mean, you've submitted your heart graciously, not begrudgingly, to the Lord. And you say, you're king. You rule. Not you prayed a prayer when you were 6 years old. But like Jesus is the king of your life. If you're a Christian, I just want to encourage you, we enter in this conversation with humility. And what that looks like, I mean, again, 1,000 commands in the Bible, like Micah 6:8, some of you have committed to memory. What does the Lord require of you? To love mercy, to act justly, to walk humbly with your God. What does it look like for us to walk humbly? Well, it's simply this, in this moment. You don't have to be right. You don't have to win an argument. And so in a conversation like this is we want to take the advice of, or really the command of James, or be quick to listen, slow to speak. And that's not to say this conversation is not complex. It's incredibly complex. And so there's some things that are true here, and there's some things that are true here. But being right here does not mean someone's wrong here. And what I mean by this is this. It's a helpful reminder as we take a posture of humility that just because you haven't experienced something doesn't mean it's not true. Just because if you're white, like I am, if you've never experienced being minimized or having a door closed on you because of your skin color or because of where you grew up or what your education is, just because you have never experienced that doesn't mean it's not true for other brothers and sisters. And so humility is like, okay, I'm just seeking to understand. I'm seeking to live as a follower of Jesus in a place of justice, of standing and speaking for those that unfortunately can't stand or often don't speak for themselves. So those are the ground rules. That's where we are this morning. This is a 30-minute conversation, by the way. It is scratching the surface. And so our hope is this moves you and I to deeper places of justice. So I want to invite our guests up. Schmidt, why don't you come up? Danielle and Joseph, why don't you guys come on up? Let me introduce them as they take their seat. There should be a couple more mics around here. Ken, on the piano, behind the piano. Schmidt, will you grab that mic right there? Thank you. Go for it. Just pull it. There you go. You guys grab a seat. So let me introduce my friends here. So this is Joseph Abrams. Joseph's a new friend of mine. Joseph is an assistant city attorney for Birmingham, and for much of his early career, he advocated for the poor and for the marginalized. I love his story. This is Schmidt Moore, and unbeknownst to me, until we began this conversation, Joseph is a member of Schmidt's church, and so. And then Schmidt Moore he's the pastor of Bethel Baptist Church here in town, and I could spend really the next 30 minutes just showering praise on Schmidt for 100 reasons. But Schmidt is a leader in some very serious way of the city church, and by the city church I mean the collective, unified Church of Jesus, white and black in our city. And Schmidt has just faithfully led that. Without seeking any kind of benefit, seeking any kind of praise or look at me. He's humble and he's ferocious at the same time. And for whatever reason, several years ago, I was just invited by Schmidt and some other guys just to sit at the adult table. I'm not sure why. I was at the kiddie table for years, and they were like, why don't you just kind of sit over here and just listen? And so in the last several years, I've been able to just sit at the table and frankly, sit at the feet of giants in our city. So, Schmidt, thanks for being here. And then this is Danielle Epps. And some of you may know Danielle. Danielle's a longtime citizen of Tuscaloosa. And I think I first met Danielle through Tesney, who's a member of our church. And there's not a lot of people, I'm just going to bare my heart, there's not a lot of people I want to steal from another church like I want to steal Danielle. Okay, so if Scott Moore's watching, watch out. Right, okay. But Danielle, she is a ferocious advocate for this issue, and frankly, if you just talk to her, if this wasn't happening in her culture these last few weeks, and you bring up another issue of justice, she's going to be an advocate for that, because she's advocating for those that are weak, those that don't have a voice. But in this time, in the small amount of time I've been on social media, I have seen more clarity and compassion and empathy, and yet a ferociousness to her voice. And this is one reason we invite her to the table, because I think your voice is important. So thanks for being here. So what I'm going to do, we're basically going to have a roundtable discussion, and you guys just get to listen in. And so let's begin this way, and you guys just jump in, okay? Just grab the mic, and then some of the questions are going to be directed at some of you individually, okay? But here's the first question is, for those of us that it feels like we're sort of watching things unfold these last few weeks, like, what's happening? Like, what is the thing that we're watching? Because it is so complex, and yet for those that are in the middle of it, it seems very clear. So what is happening right now in our country, and as it relates to race, and like what's happening right now?
Everybody's looking at me. Good morning. Let me say first, John, I thank you for taking the lead on this, to have this discussion, and thank you for inviting me. We appreciate this privilege. It is very courageous and compassionate of you to do this. What I believe happening right now, I really believe that God is at work, and I really believe that he's doing an amazing thing. He's bringing this sin of racism, he's bringing it to the forefront of all of our minds. Let me tell you how sharp God is. God has allowed the coronavirus to hit us. I didn't say he sent it, I say he allowed it to draw us closer to him. And while we are drawn closer to him, he allows this race issue to come to the forefront. And because I believe in what Corona is doing, we are better poised to deal with racism, because we've been drawn closer to God. We have begun to listen to God more. And racism is so deep in America, we're going to have to be close. You can't be a casual Christian and deal appropriately with racism. Doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on. You can't be casual and deal effectively with this. So God is at work.
That's good. That's good. Danielle, what are you seeing?
I would definitely agree with Reverend Moore, because I would be foolish to disagree with Reverend Moore. But I also think, I explained to a friend, for us, for our generation, maybe even the generation that's below me, when Emmett Till, George Floyd, that image, I haven't watched the video. I know many people haven't watched the video, but we know what has happened. But that image of the officer, Derek, with his knee on his neck, that image has spurred us on. It has awakened us. And for me, I told a friend, it's like, it's our generation's Emmett Till, who, when he was so brutally murdered, his mother insisted on an open casket. It's the image of the peaceful protest, the water hoses and the dogs. You know, when you see that, you can't deny it. And so we as in Black America, and I'm mainly speaking for Danielle, we're not monolithic, so I can't speak for every other Black person in America. But things that we have been saying, maybe things that you've heard, that image makes it impossible to deny. And I think that we are faced with this reality, and so now we've got a choice to make. We just can't be, stagnant anymore. We got a choice to make. We're either going to defend the rights of the marginalized, the rights of Black people in our country, or we're not. You can't see it and be left unchanged. You have to make a decision. And I think what we are experiencing is people making a decision on the side of justice, and really, I would say on the side of Christ.
That's good. Yeah, thank you. Joseph, how about you?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you for affording us this tremendous opportunity to have this important yet incredibly difficult conversation about race, racism, and systemic implications of those institutions on people of color and African Americans in this country. But for me, I think that this period has shown us the importance of technology and how camera phones are able to show the rest of the world an existence that many African Americans experience in their day-to-day lives. So I think that technology has brought all of us closer together and allowed us to actually generate empathy by being able to see and share our common experiences and opening up a new experience that a lot of people probably wouldn't be familiar with or have to experience in their day-to-day lives. And I think that what we're getting, Americans getting a close glimpse of these instances that, quite frankly, affect people of color, African American people disproportionately. So this is a tremendous opportunity for empathy, for growth, for change. But I think that, when you see what's going on, when you're seeing what someone else's experience is, I think that opens up the window for opportunity and change.
So all of you have already used the word racism, which has the potential to be really polarizing, right? Primarily for white people, because it brings to light a thousand ideas. I mean, going all the way back to enslavement, then moving towards Jim Crow, and then post-World War II. But the phrase that I hear again and again is, what's an issue is systemic racism. Will you just share, starting with you, Joseph? I know we talked through this, and then I want to actually lead to another question that has caused me to experience sort of a graduate level class of reading and watching these last couple weeks. But what, in your mind, when you think systemic racism, what does that mean?
Well, for me personally, systemic racism involves critical foundational institutions like the government, like corporations, like universities and schools, like the criminal justice system that encompasses courts, the prisons, the healthcare system. Now, when these critical foundational apparatuses that are important for the American experience work individually or in concert to elevate. Can you hear me all?
Yeah.
Okay. So when these institutions work individually or in concert to elevate certain groups and degrade others, I think you reach systemic racism. An example of that would be the war on drugs. That was a domestic policy that was implemented by an institution, the government, that was specifically directed to target, disproportionately arrest, and convict African American people. I also think about redlining, which is a period of pretty much government-backed lending that disproportionately favored the creation of white homeownership to the demise of black families being able to access the same income or capital to actually purchase homes. So for me, I look at systemic racism as these very important structures in American life when those agents that have the power and influence in those systems use that power, that influence, to degrade others and elevate others based on racial lines.
So that was a beautiful kind of unpacking. one of the things that I think was important for me as I'm learning is people in power. I mean, like, regardless, this is just like whether you believe about people or Jesus, I think one thing we can all agree on, if you're in a place of power and you're creating a structure, you're always going to create a structure that benefits you first. I mean, like, just it's human nature to do that. And so the structures that have been put in place in our nation, firstly, were put in place by white people, which, good, bad, or ugly, like however you read history. And so our structures are always going to lean towards benefiting white people. And you mentioned redlining. So when Joseph and I met last week to kind of talk through this, Joseph has such a handle on the economic side of this. Will you talk a little bit about redlining, like what that looked like post World War II, and really how that has impacted wealth development to this point?
Well, in America, home ownership is a major wealth driver.
It's the primary way, right?
It's primary wealth creating apparatus in this country. And when you're talking about issues or solutions to race-based problems in this country, I think wealth is so critically important, and it probably doesn't get as much attention as it should because we live in a capitalistic society. And when you survey the historical landscape, quite frankly, African Americans have been locked out of wealth creation in this country. When you're starting off in a period of chattel slavery where African American people, were considered property. I have to let that sink in. And were very specifically, the law was used to very specifically prevent this group of people from being able to truly access the American dream. And that doesn't end after the end of slavery. You roll into Jim Crow and other periods of de facto and de jure discrimination leading up to redlining, war on drugs, mass incarceration. So you have these successive iterations of systematic government-sponsored, government-facilitated, or government-complicit discrimination that has really locked African-American people out of achieving the American dream. And you can see that across the board with the racial wealth gap of how the average or the median black family has about 7 cents for every dollar that the median white family has. So this gigantic chasm it gets its foundation in chattel slavery, and it just continues to grow through successive periods of racial discrimination that is influenced by systematic.
So I'm gonna go ahead and I want to put a parenthesis here because I know, because like I'm white, and so I heard this argument several years ago, and I immediately was like, oh, this is about socialism. This is about let's just redistribute. Like this is not a war on capitalism. This is about creating equal footing for every person to take advantage of capitalism. So like post World War II, something I read this week is when the GI Bill was formed, which when we think GI Bill, we think education, right? But the original formation of the GI Bill was when soldiers were coming home from World War II was to give opportunity for these soldiers to get mortgages. But they didn't allow black people to get those mortgages. And so you had an entire generation of white people building wealth, but black people weren't allowed to take access. They were given access to the education, praise God for that, but they weren't given access to the mortgages. And so you have a whole generation that were restricted from getting a loan to buy a house. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you said a lot. But I mean, that's absolutely true, right? So redlining is just another illustration of how the government, this large system, can work to the benefit of some and to the degradation of others. And when you're talking about really creating wealth, really experiencing what it is to be American, home ownership is at the foundation of that. And frankly, after the war years, the government was in the business of subsidizing mortgages, and those mortgages just weren't given to them.
Danielle, I want to ask you a question. So we're living in Tuscaloosa, right? So it's so easy to feel removed, right? We're watching what's happening in Minneapolis, watch what happened in Atlanta last night, and cities are crumbling in 100 ways. And I've been so grateful. I was in a meeting with Schmidt and some other pastors, and first thing was just like, thank God that we haven't had riots. We haven't had buildings haven't burned down. We've been grateful for that. But there's this undercurrent, no matter what, we're feeling it. All that we've talked about so far, what does that look like on the ground? Like in Tuscaloosa, in relationship with people, I was on social media last night, bad move on a Saturday night, and a guy that I graduated high school with, I just posted, hey, we're having this meeting, and this guy kind of comes at me with these weird statistics that may not be untrue, but has zero bearing on our conversation. What do you do with all this in the middle, in Tuscaloosa in 2020?
It's different now because we are sheltering in place, because we are quarantining, we are trying to maintain 6 feet of social distancing, which in a lot of ways has helped. But it also makes it difficult to kind of know what our friends, what our neighbors are thinking. But on the flip side of that, it's also pulled us closer. It's made us have conversations with the people who are closest to us. So, for example, last night we had a food truck in our neighborhood, so I was sitting on the front porch with my friend Teresa, and we were just talking about having a conversation really kind of similar to this. And, she said, I wasn't a slave owner. I'm like, and I wasn't a slave. But we still have got to deal with what's going on. We have to stop and we have to lament and acknowledge what's going on in our country, and we have to acknowledge the racist history of our country to move forward. And so for us, I think we are fortunate. I am thankful, but there have been protests for the past 2 Sundays. There was another one, I think, maybe Friday night. But I think that we are individually in our churches, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, that we're starting to have these conversations, and they are hard conversations. It is hard work, but it's a necessary work if we are going to be healed and move forward. I don't think that we can let this opportunity pass us by, because it may be another generation before we have this chance again.
I saw something you posted a couple weeks ago. It was pretty impactful for me, and it was impactful because I said it. You had said, I think it was a repost from somebody, but basically, if we say things like, it's terrible that a black man was killed, but we gotta what's really awful is these rioters are destroying all this property, and in contrast it needs to be flipped. And it's instead of saying it's horrific that these riots are happening, instead of saying it's horrific that somebody lost their life. We put property above life. And again, this is where it's complex, right? It's of course, nobody wants their business burned down, right? It's not being forget the Wendy's in Atlanta. It's no. But it's there's got to be a place as humans, we say, human life matters. It's George Floyd's an image bearer, and it matters. And so moving the priority around of it's bad what happened to George Floyd, but it's terrible what's happening. It's no, it's terrible, and we got to.
Right. And I think
so. How do you
also,
have the conversations?
Well, my son asked me, my second son James Peter asked me, Mama, if they've arrested those officers, why are we still protesting? And I tried to explain to him, because it's not just about George Floyd. He has been the catalyst for this, I believe. But we aren't protesting against one officer. We are protesting against a system that allowed him to kneel on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, knowing that he was being recorded. He knew he was being recorded. But I think he didn't care, because there's a system that's going to protect him, that's going to defend him, that is going to allow him to go without repercussions. And that's what we are protesting against. It's a system that allowed you to hunt, that allowed 3 men really, to hunt down Ahmaud Arbery like he was prey. They hunted and trapped him as if he were prey, a deer, and killed him. And yet, without the public outcry, without the protest, and this may be unpopular, and I'm not a fan of it, but I understand it. Without the riot, there's not going to be change. It was the public outcry that led to their arrest. It was the public outcry that led to the arrest of the other 3 officers who were standing by. And it is tragic, and it's pretty condemning that it requires that. But I think it does, because what we're saying is we're not just protesting this one officer. It's not just one bad apple. We are protesting the system that has allowed this to go on and on and on and on.
That's good. That's good. I hope you're feeling the tension here. Like I'm just saying this as a white person. Like, if you're coming with your excuses right now of like, what about this? Like, shelf that. Like, do police matter? Of course. Like, nobody's saying that. And you're like, right. That's right.
That's right.
It's like, but man, we got to have a conversation of like those that are being minimized, marginalized. So it's complex. So,
and when marginalization happens, people protest. I think about the founding of this country. I mean, I think about the Boston Tea Party, which would be a form of rioting that's celebrated now, historically speaking. So, there are people who have felt like their voices haven't been heard for quite some time. And when these incidents happen, it just kind of adds fuel to already burning fire. And in order to get attention to these centuries-old issues, people have to protest and get their voices heard. So I like to distinguish rioting from protesting, and I think a lot of peaceful protesting has taken place with some outside agitators that probably can care less about what's going on. So.
Yeah, that's good. Good point. So I want to move to kind of a spiritual dynamic here, Schmidt. It's all spiritual, right? Like, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, so this isn't. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. This is, in some ways, a spiritual issue that has an outworking because of the gospel. But it's a tiring argument when I hear white pastors say things like, we just need to get it back to the gospel. If we just get back to the gospel, this wouldn't be an issue. And that would be like a couple coming to my office and saying, hey, our marriage is in trouble, and for me to go, well, you just need to get back to the gospel. Good day. It's like, well, what does that mean? I mean, like, what I would say is like, yes, Jesus needs to be the centerpiece, but here's how you got to get to work. Like, here's what it means to lay down your rights, and here's what it means for you to stop being a jerk, and here's what, it's like there are 1,000 ways that you create a marriage that is vibrant, and of course Jesus is the center of all of it, but Jesus is, it's not just like, he's not a Band-Aid. He's like, Jesus, more Jesus. It's like Jesus empowers us to do the right thing. Schmidt, what does this look like? You're a pastor, and one of the things I appreciate about you is like, I've never heard you use a bumper sticker to try to solve a problem. So what does this look like? It's like, of course, Jesus. But for the church, for our city, to have Jesus as our center, like, what does repentance look like? What does it look like for us to move forward, for us to begin to, like, see real change?
Because racism is systemic, it is deeply embedded in a system. It is toxicity in a system based on what that system has absorbed. And I say all this to say that tackling this situation is a job for Superman. When I say Superman, I'm talking about Jesus himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's a spiritual battle. No logic, no protesting, no rioting alone will handle this. This is a spiritual matter. Racism is a spiritual blindness. It is a toxicity of a system that resides in the hearts of men. And only God can change that. I said to some of my dear white brothers the other day in a meeting as we prepared to go downtown Tuscaloosa to take our stand on the courthouse steps and oppose racism and police brutality. I said the Church of the Living God is going to have to stand up on both sides of the fence. Going to have to stand up for what's right. Is not siding with one person or another person, but is standing on what's right. And I said then that if we had taken a stand across the board in the church, slavery never would have lasted. Jim Crow never would have lasted if the church across racial lines had stood. Now that says to me that there's a real chance for the church to do real good in this era that we're in if we could stand together on this against racism, wherever it is found. If it's a black man like me who has hatred in his heart for white folk, we need to stand against it. We need to apply the word of God to it. If it's white folk who have hatred or prejudice against black people, the Bible needs to be applied. It needs to be pushed and practiced and preached from every pulpit in the country. And I do believe that's when it's pushed and preached and practiced from the pulpit, the pews will eventually catch on. And so it is a spiritual matter. It's going to take God, it's going to take us surrendering to him to allow him to use us to make this thing better. But I can't do it as much as I want to. I've been working with white pastors for the last 20 or more years trying to achieve some racial balance and some equality in our city among our peers. But my friends can't make it happen. I can't make it happen, but God can. I think the question for me is, can we trust God? Can we honor God? Can we obey God and allow him to use us to bring about the change? It's on him and our willingness to allow him to use us.
That's good. Let me finish with one more question. Why don't you start, Joseph? Okay. So the question is I mean, everything you said, of course, yes. Like, hopefully all of us are like, amen to that, for sure.
It's amen.
Yeah. What would you say to brothers and sisters that are white? Like, what's a step we can take? Because I would imagine, and I don't know this, I would imagine everybody in the house would be like, no, I'm not a racist. Because we were like, I mean, same thing with them. We're like, I didn't own a slave. I mean, in fact, my family's from Europe. We're all Jewish people. And so, like, but I fall in the category of, like, white. But what would it look like? What does it look like for white people to say, that are like, I'm not a racist, but, I mean, if we'd be honest, we hear this conversation, and there should be a burden on our heart. What do we do? What's the first couple steps that say this is what it looks like to make war on injustice like this?
Well, certainly, in my humble opinion, I'd first start by saying that you don't have to be racist to acknowledge that you benefit from institutions of racism.
That's good. That's so wise. Yeah.
So, I think there's a tremendous educational opportunity when I talk about chattel slavery, Jim Crow, successive periods of discrimination. That's American history. It's as American as Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. Unfortunately, this is the...
Who both owned slaves.
Precisely. But, I mean, this is a period of American history that, I mean, we're still living the vestiges of. and not ignoring that these periods have residual effects on black people in this country. So I think there's a tremendous educational opportunity to learn about all the facets of American history, good, bad, and ugly, and arming yourself with that knowledge so you can present it when you encounter people of different experiences. And it might get us to that point where we're empathetic, where we're not necessarily judging based on our preconceived notions, but understanding that people have different experiences in this country.
That's good. That's good.
But
No, it's good. Schmidt, what's something that a white brother and sister, and I'm making a distinction of like white, black, not because sometimes it's not helpful because we're brothers and sisters, but like for white people, what would be something that like we can do to say, okay, I've heard this, I'm trying to understand, but in a practical way, like what's something that we can do to make war on this injustice?
Do what we're doing here, that's listening objectively, and accepting the fact that racism is deeply embedded in our culture. I'm benefiting from some of it, not necessarily intentionally, but I am, at the expense of some other folk who don't get the benefit. Just acknowledging and accepting and being open to making things better. Being mindful when it's time to vote. What kind of person do I want representing me in government? Now, I'm biased. I believe that all Christians ought to be in government. Somebody might run me out of here. Because our nation is one nation under, and this is his world. This is his nation. And it ought to be run on Christian principles, in my humble opinion, by Christian people. Now, I know I get shot down with that, but that's my bias. And maybe I'm prejudiced also. But I think Christian people who surrender to the Spirit of the Lord and the Word of the Lord will learn what path we must take as we seriously go down from this place, this point. We walk in His Word as it relates to racism and any other thing. And we embrace His principles. And we love the brotherhood. Now, if I love you, I'm not going to continually do you wrong. If I love you. That's the simple truth. As black as I am, the Lord requires that you love me. As white as you are, in spite of your history, or the history of your people, the Lord requires that I love you. That brother who kneeled on the neck of Floyd, the Lord requires that I love him. Don't agree with him. But love is going to be the way that we get through this. And it's going to have to be real love, agape kind of love.
That's good. That's good. Daniel, why don't you finish this out? What does this look like on the ground?
So since I'm going last and I had a chance to think about it, I actually have 3 parts. Not want to go over into the next service. The first thing I would say is, for me, my people who know me know that I am my #1 fan. Like, I love Danielle. So whenever I am asked a question that causes me to reflect, I always score higher than I probably should. So, like, if in Bible, my friend said, I teach Bible, said if they say, from a scale of 1 to 10, how close are you to the Lord right now? I'm like, oh, I'm at a 9.5. And so what I have found is instead of asking these questions of myself, I then turn and make those questions my prayer. So I then say to God, God, how close would you say I am to you right now?
Excuse me 1 second. I got to go. I got a worship service is starting right now.
And then he's running back for the 11 o'clock service.
And so I'm running today.
So, Schmidt, thank you so much.
Does that make
Trey does not get in a car accident. So,
So I would say to my white friends, and even maybe my white enemies, if you were to say that I'm not a racist or I have not benefited from systemic racism, maybe let's ask God. Like in your quiet time, in your prayer time, God, I believe this about me to be true, but what would you say of me? Show me if I am. Maybe are there any areas where I have indeed benefited from systemic racism? Are there any areas where in my thoughts or in my words and my actions where I am indeed racist? And then allow the Holy Spirit to reveal that to us. I was texting with a friend, Jill, last night about what was going on in Atlanta, and she said, what can I do? And I simply responded, pray, vote, pray, hold elected officials accountable, and pray. And she said, that doesn't seem like enough. I know this isn't my response to you doesn't sound Christian, but that doesn't sound like enough. But that is indeed enough. Because as we sang earlier during worship, even when we don't see it, he's working. And it is spiritual. Our battle isn't against flesh and blood. And so I believe as a follower of Jesus Christ that we do need to pray, that we do need him to reveal to us what it is that he's already doing, where he's moving, and how we can join him. We start with prayer, but we don't end with prayer. We then become the hands and feet of Jesus. And then finally, and this is going to sound like a dichotomy, because what I've been telling my white friends is first you need to speak, and then you need to be silent. And so you wonder, which one is it? Do you want me to use my voice, or do you want me to hush? And the truth is, I want you to do both. I want you to speak up when family members, when neighbors, when coworkers are saying things that you know are not right. And that is hard to do. And you may not even always have the words. You may not know what to say. I don't always know what to say. But say something, because silence does seem like agreement. And so we do need you to say something. But then at the same time, we have allies that are just coming, because of what is happening. It's like, I want to use my voice, but I don't really know what to say. And that's where we need you to be silent and listen to the voices of the black people who are around you and what they are saying. That's why I'm so thankful. Our other guests, thank you at the beginning. I'm so thankful that you have given us this opportunity, because what you're doing is sharing your microphone. You're sharing your space. You're sharing your privilege as a pastor of a church in our town. And you're saying, you spoke first, and now listen to these voices. So you speak, and then you amplify black voices around you, because those of us who are closest to the pain should be closest to the mic. We should be the ones leading the way, but we need our white brothers and sisters to give us an opportunity to do that. And there are so many resources available. There are tons of books that have been written. There are so many voices. Social media, I'm on it far too much. But the conversation is being played out on social media. And there are some amazing voices like Austin Channing Brown, Latasha Morrison, Brian Stevenson. Do the research. And I tell my white friends, because we've all have gotten those texts or those messages of that one voice that's saying what they want to hear. It's just saying what their tickling ears want to hear. It's parroting what they already believe. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to those voices, but if there are 100 black voices and 95 black voices are saying this and only 5 voices are saying this, maybe let's give a little bit more credence to the 95. Don't allow the voice of one to totally disarm the cries of many, because what we are happening, we're crying out. I would say the blood of George Floyd is crying out, and we have a responsibility and we have an opportunity to not let it be in vain. Like, we can make real systemic change through the election, through holding our already elected officials accountable, through legislation. We have an opportunity here, just like the Civil Rights Act, to make real and lasting change. And I think that's what the Holy Spirit is doing among us. I think he's spurring us and stirring us to stand up for one another and become the hands and feet of Jesus Christ.
That's so good. Hey, can we just say thank you to our guests? So we are out of time, unfortunately. We are during this time of as we regathered these last couple weeks, we're shortening our services to about an hour. We're 13 minutes over, and we need to get some time to clean our facility for the next service. So as you're going to exit, if you're part of our community, we're asking that you continue to give, be generous. We're so grateful for your generosity up to this moment as we are seeking to be a church and a community that does good in our city and around the world for the sake of the gospel. So if you're planning on giving today, we're not passing plates, but there are buckets on either side of the doors as you walk out. Please be generous today. You can give online. I know many of you are doing that already. You can text to give as well. Why don't we close in prayer, and we'll be on our way. Lord, thank you for your goodness, for your grace. And Lord, for those of us that have ears to hear, we say, Lord, continue to speak. These things that we've been hearing, that for some of us, for me, some of it's hard to hear. And yet we want to be people ultimately that walk in justice. Because Jesus, you are a God of justice. Jesus, you came and you saw wrong on planet Earth, and you took that justice on yourself. You took responsibility for other people's wronging on yourself. And so we want to be the kind of people that walk in that kind of justice. When we see a wrong, we join. And we stand and we speak. So we say thank you, Jesus. Thanks for our friends here today, and we love you. Amen. Hey, God bless you guys. If you can exit quickly, we have a team that's going to be cleaning the facility. Otherwise, God bless you. We'll see you next week.